"We the people," these three words, inscribed in the preamble of the United States Constitution, have long symbolized the promise of democracy, equality, and collective self-rule. But for nearly 2 centuries, this phrase was not a statement of universal belonging, but a battleground. From the revolutionary fervor of 1776 to the transformative fires of the civil rights era in 1968, the definition of the people was contested, narrowed, and painfully expanded. This is the story of America's struggle to reconcile its founding ideals with the persistent reality of exclusion, a story of how human rights are not granted. The one, at its birth, the American Republic proclaimed the revolutionary idea that all men are created equal. Yet the nation was built on a profound contradiction. The we the people referred exclusively to white, property-owning men. Enslaved African Americans were legally classified as property, not persons. Through constitutional compromises like the 3/5 Clause, women, though vital to social and economic life, were denied the franchise and legal identity under the doctrine of coverture. Indigenous peoples were systematically displaced, their sovereignty erased in the name of expansion and civilization. The founding documents spoke the language of universal rights, but the early republic constructed a political community defined by race, gender, and privilege. The Civil War and the Reconstruction amendments offered a radical vision of rebirth. Slavery was abolished, birthright citizenship and equal protection were guaranteed. The vote was promised regardless of race. For a brief moment, a multiracial democracy seemed possible. But this promise was violently betrayed. The rise of Jim Crow laws enforced a rigid system of racial apartheid. Separate but equal became the law of the land. After Plessy v. Ferguson, literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses stripped to Black Americans of the vote. Women won suffrage in 1920. But for women of color, that right remained an empty promise. Indigenous peoples were granted citizenship, yet often at the cost of cultural erasure and lost sovereignty. This was an era of partial inclusion, a democracy that recognized its people in law, but excluded them in life. Out of the ashes of World War II and the hypocrisy of the Cold War, a new movement arose. The civil rights movement did not just seek reform, it demanded a refounding of America. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. reframed the struggle. This was not merely a fight for civil rights, but a global human rights revolution. Through disciplined nonviolence, courageous direct action, and strategic litigation, activists exposed the moral crisis at America's core. Images of peaceful protesters, attacked by police dogs and fire hoses, shocked the nation's conscience. The landmark victories were monumental. Brown v. Board of Education declared segregated schools unconstitutional. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination in public life. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 dismantled decades of disenfranchisement. These were not just laws, they were a redefinition of belonging. But the journey, from legal recognition to true equality, is longer than any single act of Congress can measure. What does inclusion mean when the wounds of history run so deep? After 1968, the struggle didn't end, it transformed. The movements for women's liberation, for LGBTQ+ rights, for immigrant dignity, for disability justice each carried forward the same fundamental demand: to be seen, to be heard, to be counted as part of the people. Consider this. It took until 2015 for the Supreme Court to recognize same-sex marriage as a fundamental right. It took until 2020 for Native American tribes in Oklahoma to have their treaty rights reaffirmed. These are not footnotes to history. They are the living proof that our understanding of who belongs is still being written. Yet even as we expand our circle of inclusion, we face a paradox. The more inclusive we become, the more resistance we encounter. Voter suppression laws have re-emerged, clad in new language but serving an old purpose. Economic inequality creates barriers that no civil rights law can fully dismantle. Digital spaces, once hailed as great equalizers, have become new frontiers for discrimination and polarization. And what of those whose stories still fall between the cracks? The immigrant living in the shadows, the transgender youth fighting for recognition, the disabled, citizen demanding accessible infrastructure. Their struggles remind us that inclusion is not a single achievement to be checked off a list. It is a practice. It requires us to constantly ask, whose voice is missing? Whose experience are we failing to see? Perhaps the most important lesson from this long history is that we the people was never meant to be a fixed category. It is an invitation and open question that each generation must answer anew. When the framers wrote those words, they could not have imagined the America that would emerge, but they created something remarkable, a framework flexible enough to grow, to be challenged, to evolve. Today, that evolution continues in classrooms where students learn the full, unvarnished history of their country. It continues in courtrooms where new generations of lawyers argue for expanding constitutional protections. It continues in streets where people gather to say, Black Lives Matter, or protect trans rights, affirmations that human dignity cannot be limited by race, gender, or identity. The true measure of our democracy may not be found in our moments of consensus, but in how we navigate our deepest disagreements. Can we disagree without dehumanizing? Can we debate without denying each other's fundamental worth? The answer to these questions will determine whether we the people becomes an ever-expanding embrace or retreats into fearful exclusion. The civil rights movement transformed the nation's political imagination. It established that democracy is not a static system, but a continuous project of inclusion. It showed that rights are not passive gifts, but active claims made by the marginalized. Yet the struggle did not end in 1968. Voter suppression persists. Systemic inequalities endure. New debates over immigration, gender, and identity continue to test the boundaries of we the people. The legacy of this history is clear. Every expansion of rights has been met with resistance, and every generation must renew the fight for a more inclusive democracy. We the people is a question, not an answer, a promise forged through struggle. Each generation inherits progress and unfinished work. Rights become dignity only through action. Exclusion adapts, but so does resistance. Democracy grows stronger with every voice it welcomes. Justice bends only when ordinary people, across divides, reach for it together. The promise endures unfinished, yet alive in every choice to listen, include, and believe that a more perfect union is possible.